and welcome to a new episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. I am your host, Katerina. Each week, we dive into a blend of topics that resonate with the soul. Whether you're an architect enthusiast, have a passion for Wanderlust, want to discover holistic approaches to rejuvenate your body and mind, or are intrigued to learn about Vastu Shastra with a modern approach, you've come to the right place. Join me as I sit down with inspiring, like-minded women from various walks of life. We will delve into their journeys to discuss the challenges and moments that define their paths. So sit back, relax, and let the spark of positive energy ignite your curiosity. Hi, it's me, Katerina. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share with you something that can change the trajectory of your life. If you are ready to start your own architecture firm but are feeling overwhelmed by where to begin, I understand, because I felt the same way when I first embarked on my entrepreneurial journey. This is why I have created the ebook, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. This comprehensive workbook contains everything I wish I had known before starting my own firm. From building a solid business plan to creating your brand, The Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm offers a step-by-step guide tailored to your timeline, whether you're launching your firm today, next month, or in a few years. Dive into essential topics like financial planning, organization strategies, and how to secure your first client, all in one convenient resource. That's right, you don't have to spend hours researching. I have done that for you so you can focus on building your business. And that's not all. With your purchase, you'll also receive an exclusive meditation for business owners, mindfulness tips, a crystal guide for support, and gratitude exercises to help you stay focused and positive throughout your journey. Turn your dream of having your own firm into a reality with the Mindful Blueprint for Launching Your Architecture Firm. Click on the link in the show notes to get your copy today. Now, let's dive into the episode. Today, I am joined by Caitlin Brady, host of the Architectette podcast, and Haley Duggins, host of the Nearly One-Fourth podcast. Together, we will dive into a discussion about the experiences of women in architecture and our shared mission of sharing the stories and voices of women in the architecture, engineering, construction, and design fields. Caitlin and Haley, welcome to From the Honeycomb.
Hey, Katerina, nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
I'm excited for this conversation. I can't believe I got, the three of us together. This is going to be a really fun conversation. So as you both know, we begin every episode by sharing something that we are grateful for. So what are you grateful for?
So I just came from a bridal shower, like one of my best friend's bridal showers, and 2024 is filled with quite literally like 7 weddings, all of my closest friends and family. So I'm just really grateful to be able to be a part of those moments and just witness like my closest girlfriends from age 12 get married and just have this journey change. I mean, it's just really an incredible time to be alive right now. I'm very grateful.
Oh, that's awesome. And what about you, Caitlin?
Well, Haley, I'm sure that's a lot less stress than having to plan your own wedding too. You can just attend and enjoy.
Yes.
I am grateful for this beautiful weather that we've been having. This is my first winter as, once again, an East Coast resident. So I was living in San Francisco, so I was used to kind of spring weather year round with a little bit of cold, a little bit of fog, but also a little bit of warmth. But this was my first like brutal, dark, long winter with snow. And so I'm so thankful to finally have spring weather again. And everyone's been going outside and the city of DC is really coming alive again, which I love.
Yeah, you should have the cherry blossoms in bloom soon, right?
Yes. So that we've heard a lot about it. I hear that it's very busy, but very beautiful. So I think they're doing some reconstruction to the tidal basin where they have all the cherry blossoms. So we're definitely going to try to see them this year because I think it might be under construction in upcoming years.
Good to know. Well, it's amazing. I love spring. There's something about the energy, like both of what you just said. It's like you can feel like we're coming out of the depths of winter and it's like, let's celebrate and let's be outside and it's beautiful weather. Like, absolutely. I'm happy it's spring. Haley, can you share with listeners a little bit about what your podcast is about?
Yeah, so my podcast is Nearly One-Fourth, and the title of Nearly One-Fourth comes from the statistic that less than 1/4 of licensed architects in the country are women. And the whole purpose of it is to find everyday architects or people in the profession that are women and elevate their stories and voices.
I love it. And Caitlin, what about your podcast?
So my podcast is also for women in architecture. It's called Architectette. So I know it's kind of a random word, but if you think like brunette or rockette or suffragette, it just has that ETTE suffix. So my podcast also features women in architecture, like we said. And I also interview people across the whole AEC industry, though. So it's women in construction that are CFOs, women that are working on the metaverse, career coaches, planners, interior designers. So really just everyone within that web and circle that an architect may work with. I wanted to hear women's experiences of what their career journey was, what they encountered personally, and so I share those experiences on the podcast.
Hmm. That's why I love listening to both of your podcasts as well, because highlighting the woman in architecture, construction, design, just listening to their stories, you learn so much. And I think it helps you as an individual grow as well. So I would love to hear, and we'll go back to Haley, is Haley, how has hearing the conversations you've had with other women in architecture inspired you in your career and through your exam process?
Yeah, so I think it's just shifted my understanding of what I may be capable of. I feel like in college specifically, you focus so much on the architects and like your academics who like maybe don't have families, or if they do have families, like it's just a different dynamic. And I think talking to the everyday, like typically Midwest architects and architectural designers, like they're moms and they're career women and they have great families and jobs. So it just puts in perspective like what I'm capable to do one day. Like you are able to have the multifaceted life and you're not restricted to just your career or just your family. And they've all been very, very helpful in sharing what the ARE process is like for them. And that's something I'm in the middle of. So everyone's been really great. And the women community in architecture is super strong. So I love that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you feel less alone. And I like that you talked about a little bit about in architecture school, we do all we think about is the architects and the great, and you think about the professors and it's all this academia. But then going into the real world, there are so many incredible real world role models that you can turn to. And before I had my podcast, I didn't really know how to reach out to these other women. And by having my own podcast, I've been able to create these friendships and networking and this community of women that I feel so much more supported now in my architectural journey. And Caitlin, what about you?
Yeah, so I think mine kind of goes back to how I started the podcast. So at the time, I was working as a fully remote person at my firm. I had been living in San Francisco, but between moving from San Francisco to DC, my partner and I did a year of like the digital nomad life. And so while we were traveling, we were doing a different city every single month for almost a year. I just felt like I couldn't tap into a local community. I could reach out to people at my previous firms that I had close ties with, but I feel like I wasn't really part of that anymore. The people at my new firm, because I was working remotely, I worked with my small project team on the project that we were working on, but we have over 200 people at the firm. So I was like, you know what? I feel like I should tap into the work one because I can't tap like work community because I can't tap into my local AIA chapters because I didn't have a local AIA chapter or women in architecture. So I started scheduling little 30-minute calls with people of just, hey, like so and so recommended you, or I saw you on our intranet. I want to learn more about you, how you came to the firm. And I met people all across the firm, which was really amazing. But I started to see a lot of patterns from the women. And a lot of the women had encountered increased flexibility at our firm, either like during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic, where they were able to leave maybe around that like motherhood era, or they worked part time or reduced hours, but they were able to stay in the profession. And I thought that my firm had a lot of women working at the firm because they were able to offer that flexibility and offer kind of the option to not pick one or the other. You could pick both. And so then at the time too, as I was traveling, I started thinking a lot about, okay, like what is like motherhood and architecture? What is remote work and architecture? How about work-life balance and flexibility and mentorship and all these things, like issues that I think a lot about? I was like, ooh, other people are thinking about them too. I want to start to maybe like, how can I share these conversations with people who don't have that local AIA chapter? Maybe they live in the middle of nowhere. They're not going to industry events all the time. Or I've also felt in the past, especially during architecture school, I wasn't like the stereotype person that was going to be the favorite of the professors, or I didn't have the best designs, or I didn't do the best work. And I was like, I don't really see myself in who is like the leadership right now or who is the star student. And I don't think that means I shouldn't be here, but I wanted to tell more stories of women who had these experiences, had these thoughts, or maybe even started in architecture and then went, oh, my skills kind of, I should veer off towards business development, or I should veer off towards planning, or I should specialize in lab design. I really love these stories, and I hope that my listeners can listen and see themselves in these guests and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that. I don't really feel like I belong where I am, but I can still stay within the profession and kind of shift. So that was my start of the podcast. And then it's really just opened up so many doors that I didn't expect to. I mean, I'm a chatty person. I love reaching out to people. So that wasn't a new skill for me. I've always kind of just been like, I have a question. Like, if someone's accessible, I'll ask. And if they have time, amazing. If not, no worries. But I think I have formed a lot of friendships with people like both of you, who kind of have that fire under their butt and want to seek better for themselves and have a lot of ideas to explore. And finding those people has been really wonderful, especially women. I went to an all girls Catholic high school. So I feel like I love working with women. I love kind of being on these all women teams. So yeah, I've met so many people. And so I've gotten some like speaking opportunities, and we have 2 sessions at the AIA conference coming up with people I met through the podcast. So it really has just kind of opened up random doors in different places, and I'm so happy to kind of link arms with all of these women and make the profession a more equitable and inclusive space.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And you brought up a good point about like sharing lessons in life where, how to balance it. How do you do like things we don't learn in school, things our parents may not know the answers to if they weren't women architects, even during this time period, especially with the technology changes. So it's really great that you're also educating yourself by listening to these other women's stories. And like Haley, you said, even with your architecture exam journey coming up, it's hearing these stories. It kind of, you learn so much. And I don't know where else I would have found the information had I not been asking the questions. And like you said, Caitlin, the three of us, we have this curiosity, this fire, like we want to know more and we want to, learn. And what better way to learn than to have these conversations?
Exactly. I totally agree.
And we can keep this like an open discussion too, if you guys want. I was just gonna say, I was like, that's all I have question wise. I was gonna see like if you guys wanted to.
We're waiting for permission for the next question.
Permission granted. Permission granted if you want to speak on anything that's being talked about now.
Well, Katerina, what was creating the podcast like for you? Like how do you feel that it's influenced your journey?
Yeah, you're the OG. I feel like you started before either of us. What year did you start your podcast?
2021.
Okay.
So, but when I started my podcast, I wanted it to be all about Vastu Shastra. And I was like, I'm going to use this as a way to learn about Vastu. But which I have to say, I admire you both. Like, you guys have hit the ground running with posting on social media, posting on LinkedIn. I didn't tell like anybody about my like my first few downloads were like 10, right? Because I was like, who's going to listen to this? Like, I was like, I want to create this, but the marketing aspect of the podcasting thing is very uncomfortable for me. The presenting myself on social media, that took a minute for me to like even get into Insta stories. That I had a friend coach me through it because I'm like, how do you show up? Like, I'm just talking to a phone, I thought it was so silly. I still sometimes think it's so silly, but it's now I have more fun with it and it's creative. But I didn't have any women in architecture on until about a year into the podcast. I had entrepreneurs on, I had business owners, I had other like-minded women, I had coaches on. And then it was the month of celebrating 1 year from the Honeycomb. I'm like, I'm going to do a Women in Architecture series. And so I spoke to 4-5 incredible women. And I was like, this is so great. I'm going to make it into a series. And then I'm like, you know what? This is limiting me to how many people I want to talk to. I don't want to do just these little series in between the year. Let me just reach out to other women in architecture. And now it's just this flow of there's women in architecture, construction, design, or astrology. Like I like to mix it up. I mean, I had a marine biologist on last year. So it's kind of a little bit more like a wider net of women, and then I do sprinkle a few men in, but it has been amazing. And like you both have said, you've learned so much. And I feel like I have as well. And especially on the entrepreneurship side, for me, that was a huge, like talking to Bryn Young and Ben Norkin, they helped me feel confident. And so there's just a lot of amazing conversations that have really taught me a lot.
I think I'm going to stem off of what you were saying. One of the best things about the journey is how you just had this like continual growth of women that you could keep talking to. And almost 99% of the guests I have on are recommended by some of the other women that I have on the show. And it's so great to just have all these women championing each other and saying that they're amazing, and they always end up being the best people I've spoken to. And every time I get off of it, I'm like, she's the best one I've talked to yet. And it's so amazing to see women stepping up for one another and championing them and letting their voices be heard.
Oh, for sure. I think after I come off of every podcast, I'll go to my husband. I'll be like, this is it. This was the best one. Like this, I learned so much. So I tell him everything about it. And then I get into the next one and I'm like, okay, well, this one had this one was also really great. Like I can't say I haven't had a boring conversation or anything. Like everybody's stories are so unique.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. And especially too, like when I was putting the podcast idea together, I was thinking like, do I do a set of questions where I ask everyone the same set of questions? And in the beginning, I was brainstorming that. And then the people I had in the beginning that I had reached out to, and also thank you to them because they really took a risk because I had no idea what I was doing at the beginning. It runs a lot smoother now, the interviews. But it was like, oh, this person's so different than the next one. And it's like, I can't ask them the same questions. And it also the conversation kind of flows. So I work from like kind of like a guideline of like, these are the things I want to cover. But when the conversation flows, if it takes you somewhere else, it's like, okay, now we're in this other zone and let's talk about this because I didn't expect us to talk about this, but it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's a question I get a lot from guests is, oh, so do you have a list of questions for me? And I'm like, well, I want to ask about you, but then letting the conversation flow organically because you never know where you're going to end up. Of course, it is good to have kind of a guide. And obviously I've reached out to the person because I'm curious of certain aspects of their life. So I hope to touch on them. But like you said, Caitlin, if it veers off to another, conversation, then great. Like then that's what it was meant to be. Speaking of, I have no questions left to talk to you guys about, but I guess I do want to talk a little bit about your podcasting as well and like your experiences with having guests and kind of the coordination of all of that. What has your guys' experience been with getting guests on? And it's always interesting. Each guest, I think, especially like if you have another podcaster on, like having you two on, it just flows differently. But then like when I first started out, I had a lot of friends and family too. And I'm like, you have to get on the podcast. I need a guest. And this was also pre-video. And so it was interesting working with guests who, like my family, who aren't even present on social media, for example, and just seeing also what I've learned from them through the conversations.
Yeah, Katerina, I just was messaging you on Instagram about this. I feel like where you had Danny Schroeder, who was, I think
Oh,
she's
yeah.
your most recent episode that I
Yep.
listened to.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that you knew her too. I'm like, yeah, I went to not high school, college with her. And she grew up in kind of the same area that I grew up in. And we were in Phi Sigma Pi, which was an honors fraternity together. So that was my way of getting out of studio and staying active. So when I first started the podcast, like most of the beginning episodes are all people that I knew. And I was very active when I lived in Philadelphia. I was very active when I lived in San Francisco. So I was able to tap into a lot of those networks or communities of people in the industry. And then, I mean, some people I hadn't talked to in years, but they were very receptive to get on and be interviewed. And then as I started picking up steam and was present on social media and like strangers started listening to the episode, which was wild to get feedback from like a random person of like, oh my God, you found, my little like talking to the void podcast.
Yeah.
I'm so honored that you liked it and you listened to it. And now I've been getting more and more suggestions from people. So I just had 2 from a coworker the other day. I get emails all the time. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I could release an episode every single day, I would, because I feel like I have enough people to interview and people I want to talk to. But I am slow with my editing and I do all of my editing on my own right now. I do all the social media, I do the email blasts and posting on different things and the promotions and the graphics. I do have a woman who does help with a lot of that. She has a lot of great campaign ideas and we brainstorm on things together, but a lot of the grunt work I'm doing on my own. So that slows me down. But it's so amazing. Like you were saying, Haley, like the suggestions of people, I'm like, oh man, I don't know this person. Is the interview going to be good? And then I'm blown away. Just like,
Yeah.
whoa, like that was so interesting. And I learned so much. And because I don't know, I do a lot of research, but I don't know the person personally before going in. But then after you talk to them, you're like, wow, so I guess we're friends now. Like, let's stay in touch. And it's a really incredible experience.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a similar journey to Caitlin and how I started. So I was super active in my undergraduate AIAS. And then in graduate school, I wasn't as active, but it moved my network from like only Ohio, Michigan, Indiana to like the Southeast. So I met a ton of people in the Southeast. And so I started within my own personal circle as well. And then over time, it just grew of like them suggesting people and Googling who different people are and like who follows me on LinkedIn and are they relevant to what I want to talk to you about. And then also similar to Caitlin, I do all my own editing and marketing and all that stuff. I'm also slow with my editing. So last year, my first season, I did weekly episodes. And then this season, I switched to bi-weekly episodes because I found last season I was like so stressed about like, am I going to get it out on time? Like I'm being too slow. And I try my best to like batch record and batch edit, but it just doesn't always work out that way. And then the social media part, which I've talked with Katerina, I think about this before, is I am not a social media person. I have always had social media because it's just, I'm a Gen Z. It's the era that I live in. So I've always had it, but I've never been like a huge poster, huge participant. So I just recently started doing like the stories and things. But if I could ever have anyone do something for me, it would 1,000% be the social media part. Is to me, it is the worst part of all of it.
It is. It's the showing up, and I mean, it's amazing you both edit your podcast. So I have a podcast editor. That was one thing right out the front door. I was like, I need someone to edit these podcasts for me because I know myself I will not be able to have the time to do it. I was also still in the midst of my ARE journey. So I have an incredible podcast editor who is still on my team. We've been working together for 2.5 years, and it's been amazing. But still, the marketing, I do all of that, the podcast posts, and my goal this year would be, like I'm manifesting it, is to have like a virtual assistant to help me with the social media because it takes people don't realize how much effort it takes to, from the moment you say yes to coming on my podcast to the episode for us recording, the editing, even though you guys edit it, I don't, but I do listen back, I make the notes, to then putting it together, posting it, promoting it, marketing it, putting together all the images that need to be put together, making sure that you sent me the right information, that I can post. It's a lot. It takes a lot to put an episode together.
It really does. And I think the tools, like Caitlin and I last time we talked, we really dove into Riverside. And Riverside like really helps me.
Yeah.
Yes, I was like it's so weird, but all three of us use Riverside. And for anyone not familiar, it's a podcast recording platform. So all three of us use it. And since I've been using it this past May to now, it's like grown leaps and bounds with the tools that they're able to do. So I definitely change everything that they produce, but they help me understand like things to cut out. They recently added a thing to cut out all of the ums and the likes, and it's not perfect, but it gives me like a good baseline to cut the amount of time that I commit to editing in half, but it is a lot. It does take a really long time to get it exactly where you want it.
Yeah. And Katerina, I know on other episodes you ask about using AI, and that's something I've started to take the transcripts of my episodes and then plug them into ChatGPT and then generate the show notes from there. And then I have to wordsmith a little bit, but just really finding the right prompts to put in, because I think I would do like create like bullet points of the main talking points, but then it would kind of miss the point. But then it was, this is an architecture podcast for, listeners. My listeners are largely, women mid-career, blah, 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 create prompts that would like entice them to listen to this episode. If you put all of that in and then the transcript, then you get more talking points that would align with the episode that people might want to see, or they might see that and then want to listen to the episode. So that's taken out a lot of the time rather than me listening to the episode, which I used to do, and then type all of the good points and I type all the links. So that's one way that I've been using ChatGPT, just to work a little smarter and not longer. Because in the beginning, hours to edit, hours to listen back. Oh, I missed something. Now I need to go do it. Then I record the intro. I have the like super intro and super outro like canned, and I can just plop those on for consistency. But it's a lot. And then of course the re-recording, I know you do your intros in the episode, but I would stutter and flub and all that. So I have to read it like 40 times myself. And then I write the script for the intro. And then I read all the show notes, but I have to re-record that a lot.
I re-record my intros a ton too. It's okay.
I'm like, oh, it doesn't sound good again. I'm like, oh, that's awkward again.
That is so true about the intros. I used to also record the intros separately after listening. Now I'm just like, you get 3 to 4 sentences. Everything will be in the show notes like there is. And I'm glad you brought up, Caitlin, ChatGPT. I was so nervous to share that I use it to write my podcast notes but I'm like, you know what? I do change it so it makes sense. Because you're right. It doesn't always sound like, and you want it to sound a little bit like you, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm grateful for most in the present moment is that I live in a time where ChatGPT exists because it has made podcasting, even I know there's the AI functions in Riverside where it can take clips, because that's still the one thing that I do is I still personally go out and pick the clips, which that's
Yeah.
something I'm like, should I still do it? But I'm like, yeah, I still want to, because there's certain things that I specifically want to highlight that I think my followers will like, and that's something AI doesn't know yet. But
No, the magic clips
yeah.
really miss the point sometimes.
Do
Yeah,
they
they
really?
really do.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
random thing. They're like, oh, and then I, like scuff my knee. And it's like, wait, what? That wasn't even like something we talked about. Like it's not pertinent to anything. And they're like, this should highlight, represents the podcast, highlight this. It's like, no thanks, Riverside.
That's so funny. I didn't know. That's the thing. I haven't used it yet because I think that's where it loses that personal touch, I think. And so it's good to know, because it is. I still want, and when I listen back to the episode, that's when I take my clips, and that's when I'm like, okay, this is which one I'm going to use to promote it, and then the day of. And so there's a lot. You're the podcast host, you're the marketing team, you guys are the editors. There's a lot that goes into it, and each episode is so special. And then it's amazing, like you said, Caitlin, earlier, about hearing like a stranger tell you that they like your podcast, and like how did you find me? Like it's so rewarding.
Mm-hmm. How do you all track growth, and are there like metrics that you're watching over time or strategizing, or like Katerina, you have the most experience. How have you seen your growth over the last, I guess, 3 years now?
So I use Podbean to like distribute my episodes. I don't know what you guys use to distribute.
I use Anchor, which is now Spotify
Okay.
for podcasters.
Okay.
That's what I use as well, Spotify.
Got it. So I use Podbean, and that tracks the downloads. It tracks the statistics of where are the most downloads, what countries, what times of day. So obviously I've seen a growth since I've been promoting it more. Like if I look at my earlier ones, again, it's like the only family members were listening to it. But now I'm seeing there's been a lot of growth within the last year, especially of just how many guests I've been having on. And I think the introduction of using video has definitely changed how much more accessible the podcast is, because before the reels that you could use, which thankfully Riverside puts together for you, or it can help you edit, because that was my big thing. I'm like, how am I supposed to, do I need a video editor? And then it's just like, it ends up becoming a lot. And how much time do I have to edit it? But I have noticed the most substantial growth since videos have started, which has been really interesting to see, because people do love to see our faces and who's talking. And like, I like to see when I'm listening to a podcast, who did I listen to? And kind of helps me visualize, once I was listening to them, what they looked like, their features. It makes it more personal.
Yeah. I track my metrics on Spotify or Anchor, Spotify for podcasters. They give you similar things. I feel like I'm still new to the game. It's like inconsistent. Some weeks I'll have like a few hundred people listen, and then some weeks I'll have like 0 people listen to anything. And I don't know if it's like my release time. I don't know. A lot of it follows my activity on social media. Like the more active I am on social media, I notice a spike in listenership. That is one of my goals, is to try to be better about social media and posting more consistently. But it just makes it so much less fun for me when I'm like editing the Instagram post and posting it. And I love interacting with people on Instagram. It's just the process of doing it all. And then I have no metric of gauging like how my posts are actually translating to listens. It just, you can see like a natural increase if I post a reel or something and I get X amount of listener or watchers on my Instagram reel, I can see like a decent amount of growth on an episode, but I don't track it a ton. I try not to pay attention to it a ton.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see too. Like, I've had guests who have no social media following, and their podcast episodes will do better than people with 100,000 followers. Which that number just blows. Either they're telling their whole family, plus the family's telling everybody. Like, I don't know how, but there have been episodes like that where I'm just like, you don't even have a social media account. How did you promote my episode to? And they'll be like, oh, my family listened to it, and like friends. But I'm like, yeah, but how did you get it out there? And somehow people find it.
Yeah, it's always this one, like, sometimes you just hit gold on an episode content or an episode guest. And you're like, I had one of my old coworkers, Eva Baker, she is a lab planner and she was an architect, but then specialized in lab planning. And her episode did so well. And it was one of my early ones. It's still one of like the consistently like best performer episodes. And I'm like, maybe just like that's not a topic people talk about very often. Or I've had other people that have tons of followers and they cross promote. And it's like, I guess people have heard enough about them that they don't want to listen to any more episodes.
Yeah.
But I track on Spotify for podcasters, but I think LinkedIn is also a great way to see how many people interact with the page. And then I find out a lot more about the demographics of listeners and who kind of like where they are in terms of their career, what industries they're in. And I know the LinkedIn community that we have for Architectette isn't explicitly, they're not all listeners. I think probably some people follow and interact in different ways, but that's been a great way to kind of track who's interested and who wants to follow and learn more. But it is really like it ebbs and flows, Haley, like you were saying. Some episodes I'm like amazing and people want to hear about this guest. Other episodes it really just depends on what type of community they bring. And because each episode, we're not talking about just like explicitly architecture. Each episode is so different too, so I would imagine that listeners don't listen to every single episode unless you're my parents, because I know they listen to every single episode. So thanks, guys.
My parents do too. They're so nice. They have no interest in architecture at all. My dad's like, I listened to your episode the other day, and I'm like, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's my parents sometimes give me feedback too, and they're like, you kind of like talk a lot about like recently. They were like, you talk a lot about like their careers. Like, is there anything else you can talk about? And I'm like, that's the point of the podcast. I know that they're not architects, so like probably hearing this much about the architecture industry, they're like, whoa, like we're satiated.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's kind of my niche, and it's good to have like to niche down in something.
No, and it's good honest feedback from family as well, because I've gotten that too. I've gotten audio, like your audio's a little off on it. Like it's interesting the feedback you get from family versus the feedback you get from the public and from like, followers and things. You get it's an honest truth from the family.
Yeah. And there is some leeway. Like we're doing interviews with people who they're not joining us from a sound studio. And frankly, when I was doing that year of digital nomading, I was recording from different like Airbnbs. So it's like I'd shut the door, I'd put like a blanket over, or just kind of add as much soft surface around me as possible. But I had to do the best with what I had. Packing everything up, moving it. I'd just like pull all the lamps in our Airbnb like around me so I looked okay. But I've learned to like not aim for perfection, aim for the best I can do. And I am not an audio editor. This is not going up for any type of like awards. I'm just trying to get these conversations out. So I think I've tried to have grace with myself that like if it's not exemplary, it's still a great conversation. And like the audio things, people will be forgiving of that over time. And they're not going to hear all the ums and the ahs like I hear.
And that's one thing you bring up that's a good point is what have you learned about yourself since starting your podcast? Because especially having to listen to yourself back over and over and over again. What have you learned about yourself?
I have a lot more of an East Coast accent than I thought I did. Because, I lived in California and I kind of would pick up on things every once in a while. Like, oh yeah, I kind of pronounce that in a strange way. My mom is from Canada. So I feel like I have, and I didn't live like downtown Philly. I grew up in the suburbs. So, but I have a lot of relatives that have that really strong, like Tuesday Acme, like type of like water type of accent. Sorry to anyone that was offended by those impressions, but every once in a while I'll hear on the podcast, like I'll say something and I'm like, oh man, that was like a real thin A sound. So I'm like, oh great. Well, I thought I didn't have an accent, but I definitely do.
I feel like that's a hard question. I try my best not to listen to every episode. Even editing, like I won't always listen to the whole episode because I don't edit out a ton. I really keep it as raw as possible, but like in my head as I'm recording, I'm like, okay, this is gonna need to be fixed, and that's fine. I feel like season 2 was the first time I released individual episode, and that was really challenging for me. I have a podcast and I talk a ton, but I feel like I talk a ton just to like facilitate conversation, not to add meat to anything. And I feel like I can actually add a lot of like value to a conversation, and I just don't let myself do it. I'm just like, we're here to talk about you and you only, and that's all we're doing today. So I think in the future I would love to try to figure out how to do more solo episodes. I just really struggle with sitting there and recording. It's the only time I don't use Riverside at all because I can't just sit there and look at myself while I'm recording. So I just use Adobe or something. So I'll like record it that way, and I'll record it over a few days. I won't do it in one session because I really just try my best to think about what the content would be. So I feel like I need to give myself more credit sometimes, and that's something I've never done. I've always just been like, no, we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah, solo episodes, they're usually my shortest because there's only a certain point. And that was the one thing when I was doing my Vostu episodes is I had to do all the research and then I could read it and it was kind of a script. And then when video was incorporated, I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't, like, you're going to know that I'm reading something.
It's just like this the whole time.
Pretty much, that's all I did. I would write a script and I was like reading it and that would be my first episode. But when everybody was like, oh, we're doing video, I'm like, okay, get on the train. Like, let's go. Let's like hop on. And so I was like, that's one reason I've kind of even stopped doing a little bit of the Vostu because I don't know everything from memory. And so I was like, that's where some of my episodes have pivoted from Vostu is I'll have a Vostu expert on now and maybe I'll share something, but it's not all this research based because the camera adds it's the first seeing yourself. That's a good point, Haley. I kind of have blocked myself out at this point and I'm just looking into the camera but I still like check in just to make sure the light is fine. But it's the solo episodes, it's a lot but I feel like we all like to talk, but it's how do you keep the listener engaged though?
I mean, I really like both of your independent episodes. I think, Haley, I know you said you just started them this year, but Katerina, I've listened to a lot of your solo ones, and I'm like, oh man, like I just feel like we're chatting with your word of the year episode. I really like those this year where you were you teased it a lot before. Like, I am coming out with this episode, like think about your word. And I was like, oh, I should think about, like, I took it as like a command. I'm like, oh, I should think about mine too. And then it was great. Like I had been thinking about my word and what I wanted 2024 to be. And then I was able to listen to your episode and I was like, oh, like, I feel like we're like, you didn't know it, but I was like, oh, we're in partnership this year of kind of like what we're working towards. And I really love those formats. I have tried, not great. Maybe I'll do them in the future, but for now it's like, I just lose my train of thought too. That's kind of, wander and it's.
Oh, that's the thing is I edit those a lot more because
okay.
I'll just be like, I just recorded one yesterday and I'm in mid-sentence and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know what I was just talking about. Like a whole thought will have gone by and I'm just like, and so then I'm like, okay, let's pick back up where it is. And it takes a second. Oh yeah, absolutely. That part's edited out, but it happens a lot in the solo episodes. And thank you for bringing up the word of the year podcast episode because Haley, you just reached out to me about your word of the year and listening to it. So it's great that this is great feedback. Thank you for letting me know that these episodes resonate.
Yes, I love
they
them.
really do.
And that's good to know that you do have to edit those.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
I tried to do it once and I'm like just talking to myself and it's like, this is not good. It's like, and I'm recording and it's like, okay, start over. Oh, where am I going? Da-da. I'm like, okay, this isn't it. So I'm glad you have that experience too, but have made something beautiful out of it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It takes a few takes. And that's one thing I want to ask you guys as well. Like when I first started podcasting, I was so strict with my editing. Any little thing, I was like, please take this out, please take that out. Now I'm just like, go with the flow. Like, it's okay. If I mess up maybe something, I'm not going to completely pick apart the sentence to make sure that it sounds perfect. And I'm noticing that just also help like relieve the pressure of trying to be perfect in the podcast episode as well.
Yeah, like I said a little bit earlier in this episode that I don't edit a ton and I never really have. I'm not the best audio editor in the world. So I've always struggled with if I clip something out, like how do I stitch it together? Because there's always some type of background noise. And I can always tell, and maybe other people can't tell that it's stitched together, but unless I just sound like an idiot where I'm saying every other word, like I'll clip those out. But I really have tried my best not to, just to relieve the pressure of trying to do something perfect in a world where I have almost no experience. And I'm just jumped in a leap of faith of like, I'm going to be a podcaster today. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to order a cheap microphone and use my computer and hope it works. And so I've tried to keep it as raw as possible. So sometimes the episodes don't always sound the best because of that, but I feel like it is more natural and more of who I am. Like I don't edit a lot of myself. I don't wear a ton of makeup. Like, just as a person of who I am, like, it would just be not real for me to edit a ton of my stuff.
Mm-hmm. I do some editing, but more just to clean it up. I want to make sure that my guests sound the best that they possibly can sound. And I would never want someone to go, oh my gosh, how embarrassing that like they didn't edit that out or they left that in. So I always want to make sure that like when they listen back, they are proud of how they sound. And so I take out like some people, it's funny picking up like when I really listen in, it's some people do like they'll like click their tongue before they start talking, or they'll take like a like a deep breath, and like I don't hear it when I record, but then I'm like, oh wow, this person took a lot of breaths, and that comes through. Or a lot of times like phones go off or emails go off. So I try to take those out and clean it up. But I think over time, and I also take out the ums, the you knows, but I leave some in so it still sounds authentic. But it's not, if someone's like or I am like I will take out maybe like 4 of those 5 ums. And I think over time I've gotten better with asking questions. So I ask more directed, specific questions. I think at first I was asking more like wandering, like, oh, like, over the past like 20 years, where has your career gone and what have you done and what were the highlights and blah, blah, blah. And like the person is like, how do I respond to that? You asked like 12 questions in one. So I've gotten a lot better at really directing the questions. I come in and I'm a lot more prepared. Like over time, I used to like have to change my clothes. I'd be like so sweaty after these episodes because I would just be so nervous. But now I feel I'm still nervous, but I feel like a little bit calmer. I'm not as sweaty. So that's been good. And I think that has just helped with a lot of the editing. I feel more confident. I'm more prepared, and I know what makes a good episode and then how to ask those questions.
No, of course. Of course. Well, Caitlin and Haley, thank you so much for taking the time. This conversation has been so fun, like just to kind of brainstorm ideas of like, what can I do better? Just hearing what you guys do and like being able to share this space with both of you, because I think all 3 of us are on this mission to share women's voices, and especially in the architecture, construction, engineering, and design community. And I think across our platforms, we're really helping highlight women's stories and getting more of their voices heard.
I agree. Thank you so much for having us on. It was great to chat again. And I'm so thankful that the podcast has brought me, friendships, relationships with both of you, because I'm so impressed by what you're doing. And I'm also really grateful for your support and your encouragement as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From the Honeycomb podcast. As we conclude, I want to express my gratitude for joining me in today's episode. I hope you have found it insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and click that like button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share this with your friends. You can follow me on Instagram at From the Honeycomb Podcast, and you can also further your support of From the Honeycomb by visiting the Patreon link provided in the show notes. Your contribution helps make more episodes possible. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, A Spark of Positive Energy, that comes out on the 7th of each month. Thank you so much, and see you next Friday.